We'll give it a couple minutes to get everybody in and joined up and everything. There's a
What's up, Bill?
decent
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Doing all right, man.
Like it's a beautiful day wherever you are. Looks nice.
Yeah, I'm sitting outside to make the most of it.
Good for you. Yeah, yeah.
It's nice to see a couple new faces. I feel like I keep seeing the same people every day. In these Zoom
That's
chats.
been our problem. I mean, we have the same, 5 or 6 people on our Colorfront Zoom calls every day. Yeah.
Right.
But we're keeping busy. I guess you guys are, just a good time to catch up on stuff. And I hear there's every once in a while a shoot or something going on, but it's pretty much pretty dead right now. But I'm sure once the floodgates open, then it'll be catch-up time.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Hopefully they have a plan.
plans are good.
Well, fortunately, we have a plan for right now, so that's good.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of stuff that we're doing right now is like, pretty much every weekday until we get back, I'm trying to fill it with this kind of stuff. So
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
yeah, and pre-virus, this kind of stuff was like near impossible to pull off.
Yeah,
We did like one or two things a year.
You might get 1 or 2 people at a time. Everybody's busy.
Well, I mean, we did one. People in the same location at the same day. But this is making it so much easier, I gotta say.
Well, we can definitely make this a reoccurring thing as long as people have time. I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of good.
Sorry about all the people that are just joining. I didn't notice the admit all button. So I was like, waiting on more people. Oh, wait, no, waiting on Brandon to admit them. My bad.
Yeah. With great power, Brandon. With great power comes
Great responsibility. So, we'll give it a couple more minutes because I know things
Everybody
are just getting sorted out. Yep. No need to jump into it. But then we'll really jump into it. So.
I actually just spent, right before this, I spent some time going over the DaVinci Resolve class from yesterday. And I made on YouTube like index markers so you can click on the timestamp and it'll take you exactly to that topic. I wonder if there's a way to do that like on the fly for something like this, but it might be one of those things you kind of have to review and, okay, now we're talking about this section, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure
did
there's
you stop the video and start it again?
What do you mean?
Well, just like, okay, we're going to go to a new topic, so stop the video, start a new one. Would it create a new clip?
Yeah, it could.
Yeah, it'd be a pain in the butt.
But then you got to rejoin all the clips.
Go like this.
Yeah.
I mean, I've even thought about just like holding up a little sign, for 5 seconds. So like with the thing. So as I'm scrubbing through, like, oh, new topic,
Come on, we're all used to keep rolling.
I know. And now I have to be the guy that organizes it. So I'm trying to get efficient here.
So stop rolling.
Yeah, stop rolling.
Sounds like we need a scripty.
Yeah. If anybody wants to do it.
Found
All
appreciation
yours.
from editors.
You could also just jot down the time. The time does it do a time of day in the movie?
I thought about that too. Yeah, you can. There's like a timer in the Zoom thing, so maybe I can run that and reference it. I don't know. We'll get there.
Baby steps.
YouTube, man. I feel like an old guy trying to figure out a young person's game.
Hey, man, you got a YouTube channel. That's more than most of us.
And I'm watching like 12-year-olds teach me how to run it, like videos from 12-year-olds.
Yeah, come here.
All right. Well, it's been.
How do I get followers?
Minutes.
It's a great feeling, isn't it?
It is. What's up, Dave?
Yeah. Well, another day in paradise.
All right. Well, we'll get going. For those who don't know me, I'm Brandon from Colorfront. Jamie, thank you for inviting Colorfront to put this thing together. We've got Bill, which I'll let him explain himself, but I'm the support manager for Colorfront. You guys know I've been around for a while, but we're just going to go over the Colorfront color science, how we work, the ins and outs, the FSHDR to the analyzer, transcoder, but on the color science side of things. And I'll let Bill take it from here. Throw your questions into the chat. I will track them and try to get them out there. And if we end up going down some rabbit holes, that's totally fine. There's no problems with digging into one specific subject for a while. Take it away, Bill.
Yeah. So everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, I guess, just as a quick intro, what is color science? Why do we care? I mean, basically the goal is that, we want to capture some pictures, or we have some content that's a combination of captured pictures and computer generated pictures. In any event, we need to be able to put a look on these, do the artistic part that everything matches and looks good together, and then get them out to people. I mean, the thing that complicates it now is the front end and the back end, is that we have so many different sources of images. This is something you guys face all the time on the capture side, from all different cameras putting out different file formats, putting out different color spaces and gammas and things like this. And then on the delivery side, we don't just deliver to one thing, we're delivering to, SDR, HDR, and anything in between, and also for cinema, and and it just keeps growing, the different requirements and things. And so how do we make sense out of this? That we want to capture some images, do it properly, and at some point, add a creative overlay on these images, and then assure that everybody, no matter where they're viewing them, that they have a similar experience. And if we look at an analogy, I can go out and with my iPhone and shoot some stuff and distribute it to all my friends, and most everybody is seeing what I'm seeing. And in our industry, obviously, it's much more complex, and the implication, so many different more deliveries and ways of capturing things. But it should just be that simple, and it should be like that. And anyone who has to touch the images should just be touching the images for adding creative input, not trying to make up for mismatching here and there, trying to make one camera match another camera, try to make one delivery match another delivery, have to do multiple grades and things, and band-aids and patches just to try to make it work for different, different deliveries. So colors, with proper image management, it's, color science is a subset of image management, but with the proper image management, we should be able to get from A to B simplistically, and let the software and, do the heavy lifting and do all that work for us. And then all we should really have to worry about is the creative input. And obviously what you guys touch is a combination of in front of the camera. I mean, you're sort of the interface of, live images all the way, to when it's captured and laid down. So you're sort of bridging both sides of that. And this should be easy. I mean, we shouldn't have the things, and, all the problems that I think most people go through. And so that's sort of the goal of it. There's a lot of details in that. I mean, two real tenets, strong things today is that on the capture side from the cameras, unlike when we were capturing film, when we'd pick a particular film stock because it would imprint a look on the image that would give it a, particular style or look. And of course, later on, we could play with printer lights and things and alter it slightly. But with digital cameras, it's a capture device. It's there. All digital cameras are designed not to imprint a look. They're designed to capture as much of the original image, in other words, what's coming through the lens, as faithfully as possible. And then later on, then we manipulate these things, and they look the same. So with that premise, it gets back to that a digital camera doesn't necessarily have a look. Most people have this idea, well, this camera looks this way, that camera looks that way, and most of that is because each camera manufacturer has their own in-house, so to speak, rendering that flavors it one way or another, and hence they can look quite different. But if we really go back to the essence of the whole thing, is we have light falling on a sensor, and yes, the sensors are slightly different on the range that they can capture and the difference in the colors they can distinguish. But if we can cut through all of that and normalize all of that, then we pretty much, they're within the capture range of all the different cameras. They can start looking the same. We should be able to intermix them and match them. And sure, there'll be subtle differences. One camera may be sharper than another. One camera may have more noise than another. One camera may add, you know, different spatial artifacting just because of flare and light dispersion. But the basic color and things, if we do a proper workflow, should match between them. And then, and the same thing is on the delivery side. Once we've sort of gotten a, you know, a reference look, we should be able to then distribute that image and have all the people throughout the pipe, you know, who are looking at this image, whether they're seeing it in the cinema, they're seeing it at home in SDR or in HDR, you know, they should have a similar experience. Sure, someone seeing it on a small screen is not going to see as many details as someone seeing it on a large screen. Somebody seeing an SDR is not going to have the differences between highlights and lowlights that we have with the larger palette of HDR. But that aside, we should be quite similar. I mean, I wish we all had maybe as we move into the future, if we all had really good HDR displays at home or something, we could do some real demonstrations of some of these things, but we'll just have to talk about them at this point. So I know that's a sort of a lengthy preamble. We have on the screen share right now, it's just a transcoder taking in a image with just a default rendering on it, and rendering it out the Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 so that it looks good on most computer displays. And the reason I brought up transcoder is that if we have any detailed questions on color science and things, we can, at least I can go through the different nodes, what they do, and that type of thing, which is relates to what you're doing out on set, whether you're using the color managed workflow that we offer with the FS-HDR. I know there's been a lot of interest with that. This has that simulated in it. In fact, it's a special development version of Colorfront transcoder that actually has a simulation of the FS-HDR in it that allows us to test things and allow it to work. So I guess, you know, maybe we can just get into taking this in some direction or answering some questions, start with some more broad-based questions, get down to the nitty-gritty and details. I'm all yours for however long you want to keep going. So.
Well, just one of the first things to get kind of out there, do you want to take a little bit of time and kind of explain the perceptual model that we use, kind of a little bit of the background, why you decided to build it based on perceptual, how it works in kind of the general scope, but then also related to Colorfront?
Yeah, so I'm going to unshare this screen, stop share. I'm going to go to my locals, this other computer. I'm going to share screen. Let me just try that. And now I'm going to I just quickly brought this up. Let me just see if I can get here to that. Okay, get here, and I will. This just had some points on that basically runs through that. This was a presentation we we made, and I can just quickly step through it, but it has some diagrams and some things that that help explain some of the things I was just talking about. This presentation is available on our website, so you certainly can look at it there. But the objective of the color management is like we just are saying, that we use a perceptual model. When we're doing transforms between things, what does that really mean? It means that on the display side, that if we're seeing an image in HDR or SDR, things should just, we should have the same experience. On the capture side, using this perceptual model, and I'll get into what that means, we should be able to go between cameras and things are going to match. We should be able to change, correct for certain things, and they should all track through all the different things. We shouldn't have to do corrections for an HDR and then do a completely different correction for SDR. I mean, we should be able to do that. So, this slide here just shows some of the, the delivery quantity. This is what we're facing in the deliveries. We see there's a whole bunch of different deliveries. What's the goal of this? Preserving the creative intent. So how does the normal thing work? Well, we capture an image. We have, we come up and we adjust something we call the reference master. In other words, we have a professional or a high-end display, and whatever picture we see on that, we want everybody on the tail end to see. We actually, if we extend this whole concept, when we're watching things out on set with a proper monitor out there, we should be seeing the same thing. So we have this interchange. So, there's some real important concepts to think about in this whole managed color workflow is that we have the concept of scene referred. Scene referred means this is just simply a digital representation of the light that's falling on the lens. In other words, what was out in front of the camera going through the optics of the camera and the light landing on the sensor, that's what we call scene referred. So, and we can, what comes out of the camera, the scene referred can be different. But if we take out the footprint of the camera and just go back to the same digital representation for the light falling on the sensor, we'll find going across all the different cameras, they're going to pretty much, if they have the same optics on it, produce the same digital values until you run out of room. Some cameras will have an more extended range than other cameras. They will have a more limited range. But that's what we call scene referred. And that means it's just a digital representation of the light falling on the sensor. Then we go into post-production or wherever we do it, and we want to then get it to what the final display is going to be. In other words, this is where we, add our look transform. This is where we do whatever manipulations we may want to do. And that becomes our reference master look. This is a real important thing that, okay, we have our reference master, and from there, then we should be able to translate that into all the different deliveries, whether it's from various dynamic ranges, from SDR to HDR, from cinema to home, from a bright environment to a dark environment. All these things can be done empirically, and yes, sure, there may need to be a trim. For example, if you're trying to tell a story on a smaller display, versus on a large cinema screen, you may do some things different to emphasize something. On a small screen, you may need to be more bold in your emphasis to tell the story than you would on a large screen. But basically, the things should fall in and be very quick. And this thing is, in our industry, this just really hasn't happened. If we go to pre-press industries for advertisement and things, with still photos, the concept of color management's been around for quite a while, and things do sort of fall in place. Granted, the requirements of that side, being static images, are not nearly as on the same magnitude as we are with motion pictures. So, we don't want a separate finish for each thing. We should be able to have, we should be able to scale these things and not have any trouble. I'm just going to step through this really quick because it's a long presentation. I want to get back to some of the meat, but there's a couple of slides in here. We should be able to soft proof both SDR and HDR. We can decide what an HDR image is. Is it a 1,000 nit image? Is it a 600 nit image? and then what an SDR image is. Is it 100 nits? Typically, what people are doing today is that HDR is basically based on around 1,000 nits, and an SDR is based on 100 nit, and a dim surround. This is for home delivery. We should be able to soft proof our images with both of these, either on a single display or A/B on the display, whether we're out on set or anywhere along the production range. It's important to see HDR out on set, and this is just sort of taking a sidetrack, is that where most people have the lighting, you know, have had a lot of experience lighting for SDR images, film images, normal television, it's always been SDR, that kind of a capture range. Now when we have this extended palette where we can show things, details, and have them go brighter in the highlight area, we have to start taking those into account. We may need to adjust the level of a practical light, where an SDR, it didn't make much difference whether we're up a couple of stops one way or the other, because it's all just being rolled off. And HDR, that can make a big difference in the story. So it's good to be able to soft proof both the SDR and the HDR while you're capturing. So the look between them should remain automatically constant. We should have, one should have more dynamic range than the other, but they should be the same. You know, whether we're in 709 and in the cinema, these were some things that, you know, you can see a mismatch here. If we, you know, are watching a 100 nit master, and then we're watching a 48 nit master in a dark surround, they should look the same. And if you perceptually match them, then you can see over here that the darker one with the dark surround now matches this one. This is part of the color science. This is the perceptual concept behind that. And what do we mean by that? There is actually an engine that has a model of how the average human visual system works. That's why things should just plug in at any different nit level, and of course any different camera, and they should just come up looking good. And then we can spend our time adding the artistic input to the image, as opposed to just trying to get a normalized base image. So these are some real important things. There's some things in images when they're bright. These are some of the things that happen. There's effects with contrast, as contrast increases with luminance. So you make the image brighter, it looks, or the surround brighter, it will look more contrast. The colorfulness gets bright images look more colorful than dark image. So there's a whole list of perceptual things that our visual system does. If those are put into a model, then things just sort of fall in no matter how you render it. So that's basically what we mean by a perceptual transform. And in all of our color management, this is what we do. It's new to our industry. It really hasn't been done very effectively. I mean, we've basically done individual, you know, tweaking, no matter, you know, for different deliveries and different sources. And so that's it. For example, here's a simple puzzle. Probably everybody's seen that. Is that the squares on the left, for example, the very top one on the left looks brighter than the one on the right, and actually they're both the exact same level. This is that when you surround something with dark, it looks brighter than when it's surrounded with white. And so if we correct it, now they'll be a little more similar. And this is just saying, okay, we'll use a perceptual model and take in the difference of the surround, and then it makes them look closer. So same thing with color. With these are the same values, and then if we move them in perceptual correction, this, you know, over this kind of a display, you sort of see the effect, but it's hard to truly see it. The other thing that's really interesting with the way where our eyes perform with color is that at the very low end, as things get a little bit, we add a little bit of light, you can see, ooh, all of a sudden we start seeing we see a lot of change. And as things get brighter and brighter and brighter, the change doesn't happen. And it's sort of it's a logarithmic type of a curve. And all our senses are that way, from touch to hearing to hot or cold, is that we're very sensitive at the very bottom end to the first changes, and then as we go up brighter and brighter, they don't. So all of this stuff has to be taken in to the color models. This is just showing the effect of colorfulness. Here's you know, the concept behind the single master is that we can have different inputs. We do a color grade, pick a look, and then put it out. And no matter what the brightness and the display is, you know, in the display environment, they should match. So this effect has been used in broadcast. This is one where the FSHDR was used in broadcast to do the same type of thing. And then, of course, for cinema, these are just showing some of the tools that are out there. I'm just really going through this quickly. We can always come back. One of the things that with this whole environment is that if we made a color decision, you know, remember we've all been passing around CDL files with our system from all the way on set through to finish, and a lot of you have seen the demo of this. We have a larger color decision list. It includes CDL values for adjusting color, but it includes all the other different things so that you can take this simple text file. Somebody can set up a look, say in post-production, bring it out to set. You're going to see the same thing. You can alter the look and you send the text file back, and no matter where it is, whether it's in dailies, anyone, they're going to see the same thing. And what's even more important is that you may be looking at it on monitor, you know, one kind of a display, and you put it into, say, the final finish on a projector or on a larger HDR display. This list, the output transform just changes to match the display, and we still see the same thing. So it makes a really good portable thing. This is integrated for out on set with PalmFort and the FSHDR as the engine to do the rendering. So anyway,
All right, Bill,
I'm going to switch back to the other stuff.
We have our first couple questions.
Oh, that's
thank you,
great.
everybody,
Okay.
for being patient.
Yeah.
We'll roll through all of them kind of in order. The first question we have is from Mike Sipple. I lost the chat window. Please hold. He says, how do you go about deriving the IDT, to use ASIS terminology, to undo the camera particular look or get back to scene referred color?
Very good.
Are you relying on the manufacturer to do that, or are we deriving our own?
Well, we do both, but the major manufacturers have done a pretty good job. I mean, they know their cameras, they know the sensitivities, the color sensitivities of the camera. So what's default in all of our transforms are, say, from ARRI, Sony, Panasonic, Canon, are the manufacturer supplied ones, and we use those. And in fact, we do testing from time to time with side-by-sides with cameras, and for the most part, they all work pretty good. There's a couple of differences because of their philosophy in a very simple thing, and that's just white point. In other words, there's been this different philosophy between whether it's based in D60 or D65. That's a simple correction to make it match if there is a difference, but otherwise, they work very well. Often, the IDT has been blamed for, especially in ASIS workflows, as being the culprit for breaking things, and there may be some sense to that, but most of them are very good. If we use those stock ones and have good color rendering throughout the rest of the pipeline, it works really well. So today's IDTs that are supplied are very simplistic. They are basically a matrix that basically takes the color that equalizes the color sensitivities. So if you're making one, you will have a set of color targets or color that's projected into the camera, and based on the spectral response of that, we should then come up with a certain digital values, and that's how they've been derived. And then the manufacturers have done some fine tuning on them. One of the things that they try to do is certainly make memory colors match. That's the most important thing, skin tones. Where cameras can't match with IDTs is if we get way out on the outer limits. In other words, we start shooting synthetic lights, LED lights. That's the biggest problem that's facing most people. That's where different cameras are going to see things different. If we look at a camera and try to understand, well, why would they be different? Well, a digital camera typically, so it has enough sensitivity, it just has 3 sensors. In other words, it has 3 ways to look into the visual spectrum. In other words, we go all the way from short wavelength blue light to long wavelength red light with green in the middle. They take a snapshot, a sample, and on the practical side, there's a lot of overlap between those. In other words, the blue sensor is still being excited by normal green light, and then the red sensor is also excited by some green light. So there's a lot of overlap. So if we put it in real simplistic terms, what comes out of the sensor is a very unsaturated image because there's so much cross color from the other channels. And that's done on purpose. I mean, there's a practical side of why it's done, and then there's the idea of having enough sensitivity. So what we have to do, if you have an unsaturated image, we have to boost the saturation. The way you do that is you subtract, for example, in the blue channel, you subtract green from it, and in the red channel, you subtract green from it, and then that gets you back to capturing real colors. The problem is when you have outline colors like single wavelength blue light or green light or a red light, the cameras will put outputs that go way out in the outer space where without proper handling can mismatch things. And even with the proper handling, they're all going to see it slightly different because the spectral sensitivities are different. But with normal colors that fall in, our normal color palette, we'll find that with the proper matrix, they all match. So I don't know if that's a really long-winded answer, but I hope that goes there. If we have a camera, like oftentimes we'll get a still camera, we have different techniques where we can take a Macbeth chart and then analyze the patches on that against a goal and come up with a proper matrix and an IDT that will make it match one of the other cameras, standard cameras, or say an Arri or a Sony that has a standard manufacturer IDT, and it will match as well as the camera can. But yeah, we can manufacture them by using that technique.
All right, then we got a couple questions rolling in, but so a follow-up to that question was from Danny. It says, as a follow-up, is there a matrix compensation implemented for certain cameras, and if so, are they flexible in regards to the IDTs?
Well, you can do whatever you want as far as an IDT. I mean, you can change the color of it or whatever, but I'm not sure what we're compensating for. The IDT basically gets back to what that concept of scene referred light. In other words, it's just a linear light coming out of the sensor, and we try to normalize that so that we have a standard color sensitivities across what we call the pointer gamut. I mean, that's a color science term. The pointer gamut are an array of real world colors that aren't out in the stratosphere. In other words, these are colors that exist in nature, not colors that we synthetically produce, like with narrow wavelength LED lights. So if you do it properly, all of the pointer colors should end up coming out from the different cameras the same, and there shouldn't be a reason to correct for that. If there is if you've put a camera with under some different lighting, or if it has, this is something I've worked on for helping people out sometimes. We actually had that with the HPA ASIS project, if any of you have seen that. And there was a scene where everybody was illuminated with a rear projection screen, and those are LED lights. And if you looked at the skin tones and the different things, a normal IDT on that, everything came up kind of pinky and not quite right. And that's where we actually compensated for that. And I've been on several things where we've shot a Macbeth chart and we've done some corrections just to balance things up for slight differences for those types of differences. But for the most part, the manufacturing ones come up really close. If you have two cameras pointed at the same thing, two different manufacturers, they should come out really close. Yeah.
All right. Just to not just hear me and Bill talk, mainly me say anything. Chris, I see your mic's open, so why don't you ask the lighting HDR question?
Yeah, well, my first question actually is just super basic. When in a studio type environment, when you're doing corrections on a 30-inch panel, let's say, and you're viewing 1,000 nits, what would your bias lighting be set to?
Now you're talking about bias lighting where you're setting the black cutoff, so that probably what you're referring to is compensating for ambient light in the room, if that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
And remember those black squares I showed you? I mean, we've had this concept, you're probably well aware of it, the kludge way back that we've used back in the analog video. We use that to adjust when whatever environment you're on. You had two patches, one that was at complete black and one just slightly above black, and you'd bring the bias lighting up or the basic brightness of the display up to the point where you could just start to see the first one. And that's important because as the surround gets brighter, then it starts sort of like crushing the black areas. In the color managed workflow, we have a slider actually in the in all of our things that's called ambient correction, and it's balanced. If I share the screen here, I'll just show you. Let me just share. Okay, and if I go here, let's see if I get this to work. Okay, and I'll bring this up and go back. Okay, so you can see this is our this is the, there's two bookends in this, and I'll go over the pipeline, but there's one bookend is the IDT on the input side that normalizes everything, and then we do our different color operations, and then this is the ODT that translates this into whatever display and viewing environment we have. So we have a compensation for that, and you can see we can bring that up, and it does more than just raising the bias light, but it brings it up. But to answer your question, if you're in a room, the very first thing is, and on a lot of displays, as we were talking about, the eye is most sensitive at black, is that if you have a patch that's just a slight amount above black, that's where the bias should be brought up, where you just start to see it and then back it down. And then we know we have the brightness set right, because I've seen a lot of default settings on monitors where it's just crushing a little bit, and that can really raise havoc. So I like the concept of it. And in fact, this this frame, if I go, I'll just go to color correction here and just raise the blacks on it a little bit, and we can see that this actually, you can see now, this, I like this, and this is just the standard Kodak frame. It actually has one patch you see on the left. I've really accentuated because I just, raised the heck out of the blacks. It's just slightly brighter than the left. And so I use this image a lot of times just where I can set the bias on the monitor where I just start to see that and then just make it just barely perceivable, and then I know I got it right. I'm looking at my laptop where I'm seeing our presentation on, and I can just barely see a difference there. So that technique, I think, is very important to assure that's not there, because all it has to do is be crushed. If it's really badly crushed, then we may have a legal full issue, and I can't emphasize enough of how much problems that can be in a workflow if we're not properly scaled right. It seems like that's something that's going to keep us all employed for a long time, because it doesn't look like that one's going to go away. But anyway, yes, that's
all right.
That's how you should set it. Mm-hmm.
Chris, you got another question to follow up
Yeah,
on that?
and the follow-up question is kind of in the same realm. I asked this question in a different chat a couple of days ago. Based on, for DITs, we typically trying to stay with a 24, 25-inch size monitor.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to HDR, it seems to be that it's a little bit subjective how much brightness you might need based on the size of panel you're looking at. In your experience, what would you say for a 25-inch type size monitor? How much brightness is good enough?
Maybe the sad story is that the choices, and this is really just now changing a lot, the choices of any kind of HDR display for on set have been pretty slim. I mean, if we could all bring the Sony X300 or X310 out on the set, we'd all be really, really happy. And it's not so much about the brightness, because if I have an HDR picture up and I can do a rendering for 1,000 nits, I could do a rendering for 600 nits, and you got to look really close to see the difference. Remember that curve I showed you is that as we get up in those brightness ranges, the difference between 600 and 1,000 nits is not very much. The amount of energy that the display has to put out is linear. In other words, it's almost twice as much energy. So that's why as you get brighter. So I guess to answer your question is 600 nits is pretty good. What's more important is the accuracy of the display and the technology. Some of the technologies available, especially for on set, have not been LED-based technologies. It's been LCD. An LCD panel, which is what we all have on our laptops and everything, it's basically good for about 800, 900, maybe at the best, 1,001 contrast. Some more advanced technologies get a little bit over that, but that's not nearly enough contrast for HDR. Remember, HDR is not about brightness. It's about dynamic range. That means high dynamic range. In other words, the difference between the blacks and the whites. So if you only have 1,001, you can't show HDR. You can make it make the full on 1,000 nits, but what we're going to find is that the blacks are all washed out if we bring it up that bright. So the technologies available on set have typically been LCD with a back array where we have local dimming, where we can dim around certain zones, and what that ends up causing is a lot of haloing. So that's been a problem for on set. In fact, some of the really cheap, if we can tolerate a larger monitor, we can get a much more accurate HDR picture with a $1,200 55-inch, which is awful big, white OLED for a LG type panel, delivered either by LG, Sony, or a number of people, and that you can make a very good picture. The good news is that that's coming out. What is it? 48-inch. So there's a 48-inch panel coming out. The other thing that I like to say is that we've been used to looking at really small displays on set, but to accurately get the impact of HDR and what it's going to do, I think we need to see it in a little larger display. So these are some of the discrepancies. Sony have an OLED that's 17-inch. That's really getting small, but it is OLED, and it'll do 600 nits, and that one's certainly very accurate. The new XDR from Sony, which does not work with right now with BNC video.
You mean from Apple, Bill? The XDR from Apple.
Yeah, from Apple. Yeah, the XDR from Apple. My mistake. That one may have a lot of. We've been experimenting with that. That's a $5,000 monitor. That may show a lot of promise once we can figure out how to hook up to it. And so I think there's a lot of things coming out that are pretty good. If we can get up into the a little bit more money, then we can get into some good-looking 30-inch displays that look pretty good. But if it all gets down to it, it's going to be really hard to beat the consumer side if we can extend that. And that's where I'm hopeful with this 48-inch is something to look at. I mean, at least to have somewhere on set. If you're going to do HDR, wow, let's see how it looks. And then there are, like I said, newer 30-inch type displays coming out. The 25-inch, we'll see. I think anybody who's making monitors, they're all feverishly trying to come up with something that will produce an adequate picture in some smaller displays. And it's just, there's some technological limits as to what's available right now, but that's changing pretty rapidly. So anyway.
All right. Jamie, is your question on the monitor line, or do you want, I can hop to somebody else's question?
I'll ask it.
Okay.
You guys can hear me, yeah?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we hear you.
Hey, Bill, I'm curious. I'm curious because everyone's chasing out like the fancy displays that are coming out. Have you guys done any demos with people that are learning about HDR on like subpar displays to show them how HDR won't work on our current displays and possibly what it looks like if they're trying to do it wrong?
Well, I guess that could always be done. I mean, that could be certainly set up. We have sometimes have done that at our office where, and I won't name different displays, but we've had a lot of displays brought by the office, and different manufacturers want us to demonstrate it, and we've certainly shown what happens when it's not right. I mean, there's been several manufacturers that have brought by bright displays, and they're calling them HDR displays. That was really prevalent a year or so ago, but where they can put out up to 1,000 nits or more, but they're still an LCD display, which means then the blacks are really raised. And then when you look at a picture on something like that, the blacks, if it's a dark picture, it looks all washed out. If it's a bright day, you're not going to notice it so much. But for critical work, I wouldn't rely on that. I'd be, yeah, I just think, you know, like I said, some of the consumer monitors, which are very affordable, it's just the bulky size of them to date. And we'll see how this 48-inch one works out. And there may be, like I said, there's other choices like the Apple XDR that looks like it might be, its technology is LCD with local dimming, except the local dimming array is very, very fine. In other words, there's a lot of arrays, so it doesn't cause the blooming and things, and they have it managed really well. So the preliminary look we got with it is looking really good. Of course, I got kind of disrupted with the current situation we are in right now, having the whole up at home, but that's going to continue. So I think there'll be a lot of movement on that. So,
all right, going back just a little bit on the IDTs, just switching gears real quick. Curtis, you had a question.
Oh yeah, regarding we talked about the about the Phantom camera and the IDT that they provide. You know, we always have a lot of issues on set with matching it to other cameras and whatnot. And since we were talking about IDTs and perceptual matching, like what are you guys doing? Because it doesn't seem like they're really providing us with anything.
Yeah, I think a lot of these cameras that aren't really mainstream cameras either don't have the appreciation or the experience in being able to make the match. We've taken, I mean, I've had some Phantom cameras. We've gotten some footage off Phantom, and we've had, in fact, had someone expose a proper Macbeth chart with proper lighting on it, and derived an IDT for it, at least in that lighting condition, and it matched fairly good. Even at the best case, that kind of camera really is hurting for light. I mean, that's a big problem when you don't have much time to sample. So you got to do a lot of shortcuts. And part of it gets back to the amount of filtering there are on the different colors. And there's a lot of overlap and a lot of emphasis on the green, which captures most of the luminance. So, which is a trade-off they have to make, because otherwise the picture would be noisy or wouldn't have any sense. You'd melt everybody if you're trying to go with the high frame rates. So, but their supplied IDTs are probably not the best. I mean, they've optimized the camera out of the box to produce a usable picture in Rec 709, and without really a lot of consideration of it matching or falling into a color managed workflow. So maybe they will do better. I mean, the latest stuff I've seen from them, I haven't been particularly happy with, but we have been able to take that and make it match. The other thing with that camera is the green runs on the high end, that it's dynamic range. In other words, if you have much contrast, the highlights burn out really quick, and that's another trade-off in the design of the camera because of the high frame rate. And we've done some things with our management and debarring where we can come out of it and reconstruct the green that's been which signs off before the red and the blue, and end up with you know, some more usable range on the high end. So it can be made to work, but it is, you know, it's never going to have the fidelity that you're going to have with a you know, first rate ARRI red or Sony camera or something. So
all right, next one is Danny on perceptual compensation.
yeah, so what's your question?
Is he still here? Danny, you still here? Oh, he's here. You're
He's
unmute.
muted.
I'll unmute you. Unmuting. I can't unmute you. Oh, there you go. All yours.
Yeah, perceptual compensation. From what I was referring to was specifically the me and Bill. We've had this conversation maybe a few years ago, if you remember. I'm no say hello.
Yeah. Hi.
So yeah, it's still a factor with the newer incarnations of the same chip, but yeah, green compensation specifically in ASIS. So it's more to do with the actual profiling in terms of what certain people bring out in their respective IDTs, and as to what the person who's previously speaking about the phantoms as well. They're all in flux. So if there's something specific that's a definitive in terms of numbers that you put out, you know, I think sometimes it'd be good to see those numbers from what those ideals are.
So just to understand a little more in detail, you're talking about a specific IDT for a specific camera that you would want to see how it works, or what numbers are you referring to?
Well, most cameras, they're all, I mean, unless you actually do a side-by-side with one, well, maybe 3 or 5 different cameras of the same model, you're always going to get a fluctuation in the magenta and the green. So that degree of compensation, you know, sometimes it can make a significant difference.
Yeah, well, some of that, yeah, you can. I mean, if you've seen fluctuations, a lot of it can be due to the downstream processing from the you know, the look that's applied to the image, to the output transform or ODT that's going to the display. These are all things in the whole production pipeline that can accentuate those problems or actually be the cause of some of the problems. If all of those are in line, then that can minimize some of those differences. But if you have some specific things, maybe why don't we touch base? I'd love to, if you got some example images from different cameras where you're seeing a problem, I'd love to address that with you, because maybe I'll learn something too. I mean, I want to, you know, see the different use cases. But the IDT, I mean, depending on what the camera is, if the camera doesn't see the colors, for example, like the Phantom and stuff, you know, it has such extreme overlap that, yeah, you can compensate only to a certain extent, and then it's just it doesn't distinguish enough on the colors, and you can see some of that like in the subtle differences in skin tones. And once you get a good IDT, what I've found with that kind of a camera, those subtle little tonal differences that a good camera will capture across someone's face, it may just look all kind of monochromatic, you know, all the same skin tone, and it's just that the camera's just not able to distinguish those differences, and no matter what you do. So, but if it's something else, reach out to me afterward, and would love. I'll go over with some more details with you. If you got some example images, we can exchange things. I can try things with them for you. So,
okay, I think it'll be easier if I give you a visual reference.
Yeah, sure.
All right, I think we might have a follow-up on that from Dave, Mr. Satin.
Yeah, I think what Danny was trying to say was, in my experience, especially with Aries and definitely Alexas, there is enough variance in sensor manufacturer where you might have 2 or 4 or 6 cameras, and you might find that the A camera is a couple of points magenta, and the F camera is a couple of points green, and every one of those sensors is within manufacturer's spec.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that could just be the optics.
Nothing is perfect, and you could do this with the same light, same lens, you know, serially, one camera after another. And
that can be a
range of values, and that's what I think Danny's trying to get at.
Yeah. Well, if there
was a knob for that, it'd be great.
Yeah. I mean, some of that gets down to it's white balance. We have tools for doing that. In other words, if there is a slight difference in the sensor color temperature, or white balance really is what it gets down to, and you try to go downstream and try to compensate with CDL controls, those are not the right controls. And and you may correct one particular tone level and have it match, and then other things will go off. So we do have.
Hence the question.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
all we
yeah.
have the CDL controls, and they don't solve the problem.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the right controls are if you look at my shared screen here, and this all exists in. I'll go to this one module here, and this is everyone see that one there, all right? And there is the color temperature, and then there is a tint. And really, what these are is in scene referred linear. In other words, it goes back to what the light is falling on the sensor. We're adjusting RGB gain and linear light. That's what these things do. And in the transcoder, we can actually, and this works really well, if we have a gray frame or a fairly neutral tone that is that both cameras are shooting, we can take one as a reference, click on it, and you can see there we can pick it, and then we can go to the other camera and hit balance, and it will offset the exposure and the tint, and to make those two levels match. Since this is done in scene referred linear light, then everything tracks, because that's really what's causing the difference is that there is just a slight difference in the balance. Some of it gets down to the anti-alias filter that's in front of the sensors. That basically is a low pass filter, and those are actually a very critical thing and can make a difference. Also, if there's any a slight difference in the amount of infrared or ultraviolet light falling in, that can throw off the balance. But they're both pointed at the same exact thing, then it's just simply probably a difference either at the sensor level that is just slightly different and needs a balance there. And this tool will do it. If you do this, then things will track all the way up and down. If you try to do it with CDL, you'll get one particular level of gray to match, and then things up and down the spectrum don't match. So that can bring it in. And then, like I was saying, that there is some disagreement between different camera manufacturers when they make their IDTs as to what they call white. And if you use this tool to balance them, they all fall in real close. I think if you look at Sony versus ARRI, you'll see just a slight difference. ARRI looks a little greener, and Sony is not as much. I mean, it's just that. But if you do a white balance or this type of null, it basically will compensate for most of that. So.
Hey, Dave, do you have another follow-up on that line, or I'm going to skip back to some other older
I
questions?
definitely do, and the question is this. So, transcoder obviously is a post product. Is this something that exists in that FSHDR workflow?
Well, the FSHDR has the manual control to do it. Is there a white balance? Since this is live video, probably something that at some point could be implemented if we can build up the business case to develop it and put it in there. But it certainly has the manual control where you can look at it. You can do with the FSHDR, if you have two cameras coming in, a split right down the middle between the two, and if you aim them upright, then you could visually balance that. So yeah, that can be done to compensate it if you need it right on. The differences we're talking about is really should not be a lot between the cameras. If there's a major difference, there's something else going on because
I gotta jump in here. I mean, guys we work for have very acute color vision, and I can tell you from personal experience, going back, God, I hate to say it, decades at this point. This is an issue. And if I had a, and I'm going to say I have an FSHDR. I'm very happy about that. I mean, if there's a way, this would cause me to use it, as a primary color management tool instead of Swiss Army knife between HDR and SDR, which is what I'm doing with it now. So
well, then what I'll do for you, Dave, is I'll take a note and I'll put an internal ticket in there for you.
Yeah, and this has also been asked by our broadcast colleagues who use it extensively too. That there some of them who are using it as they have a tool.
Yeah, that's a completely different conversation than what we're talking about here. I mean, they have an intense lack of color management, and the results they get to that, but they don't want to hear it. So
yeah, and once again, if you've got some example images, reach out to me. I'd love to look at them, and I can take a look and I can interactively look at them with you.
Well, we'll have to figure it out when this this shit is over. We can actually get together face to face. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, face to face, I hope is coming not too far down the road, but we do what we can virtually until we get to that point.
Hey, Sip, do you still have a question? I see you lowered your hand. Are you good? Mike?
Oh, your mic.
I do have a question, actually. So in the context of the FSHDR, this whole, the manipulation you're doing there where you're readjusting the white balance, I assume that that's basically like a raw adjustment you would be working with off of like a .ARI or a Sony MXF RAW or something like that. Is the FSHDR able to do this off of a video signal coming in over SDI, where it's able to do this reverse IDT to get back to scene referred?
Yeah, I mean, what you're referring to is that the factory supplied DBAR or viewer modes from the cameras where you take the raw file, like the ARRI viewer has a similar thing, and it's basically it debears the image. You get back to an RGB image that's really the scene referred linear light coming off the sensors that's been reconstructed in, and that's where you're balancing it. Likewise, if we come out of that same ARRI camera in log C, we unbuild that all the way back to scene referred linear light, and we can adjust the same thing. So yeah, they do work the same. Yes. And Sony do the same thing. So I think this is very good. I mean, it's just once you're with CDL controls are creative tools to adjust things such as they are, and they're not. They will not compensate for this. Likewise, what's really interesting, once you have this tool, I don't know how often I've been pulled in where the DP wants to do an over-under test. Let's just take our camera. I want to do +3, -3. I have nominal, and I want to do that. As long as the lens is accurately calibrated in T-stops, all you got to do is type in the exposure offset here, and they all match. We've done that demonstration for a lot of people, and that's really great. You cannot do that with CDLs because contrast and everything else changes. So you'll find if you take whatever your favorite camera is, ARRI or Sony or Red, and walk it up and down, +3, -3, or you can go more, and you compensate here. So you say on your shot that's +1, you can do -1 here, and it's going to match your nominal default exposure, and you can go all the way up and down. It makes it great for doing an over/under test, and it's really great out on set. So you may be shooting something outside, and we got a lot of clouds, and say, well, I want to make sure I have all that detail, especially with HDR. That's where HDR really becomes important, is to capture faithfully the highlights, because in SDR they all get smushed together, and you can have some artifacts or burned out stuff, and it doesn't look as bad when you go to HDR. It better be there. So you may say, I'm going to compensate, and let's just go, let's close the lens down a stop, or maybe even 2 stops. What's it going to look like when I bring it back up? Here you are, and you can do that here and get you're assured that you've got the latitude there, and it compensates surprisingly well. I mean, most lenses are pretty well compensated. Where I found most lenses where they deviate a little bit is on the very last, when you go wide open. Sometimes they aren't quite what they're said to be, in other words. But if you go 1 click down, then usually it matches all the way up and down. So
all right, next question is from Ryan.
Hey Bill, thanks for joining us today.
Question
about going back to camera matching, right? So for a moment, let's ignore all physical variance in manufacturing and optics and filtration and such. What do you have to say about this increasing use of, in Resolve, there's a plugin under the OFX tab for color space transforms. And what people are doing is they're selecting an input color space. So they'll select the gamut and the gamma from one source and transform it to another output. So for example, taking something from red, taking it from their version of log 3G10 and taking it into log C. Do you have any comments about that kind of color management and how that works against something like ASIS, which has much larger design goals?
Well, ASIS doesn't really currently have a tool for doing, they don't offer color space transforms. the ones in Resolve, we do that extensively in all our products. And for the most part, the plug-in transforms, and I haven't really evaluated every single thing in detail, but they pretty much seem to match and seem to be working properly. But that's outside the current scope of ASIS to do that. I mean, ASIS basically takes the whatever comes out of the camera and applies an IDT into whatever ASIS color working space you're going. The IDT basically takes it into the wide gamut airy primaries, which are called AP0, and into linear light. And then in an ASIS pipeline, then you go to whatever grading space is typically recommended to go to ASIS CCT, which is similar to log C, but the primaries are a little different. Do your knobbing, and then you apply your look, which is the RRT, and then your output device transform. So I don't know, basically if what you're asking in Resolve, can you faithfully go between them, it seems like they're doing the right thing. I haven't seen any evidence in the color space transforms that don't match. We also offer, and this is just coming out, just as probably most of you are aware of it, is a whole Colorfront plugins into Resolve that work with that. They'll do the same thing. And when I've evaluated our plugin against the ones Resolve offer, they're it's math, and they should all match and work the same, and they seem to. Our plugins have the full Colorfront engine that we've been talking about available in Resolve, or you can do a stock Resolve ASIS and then augment the ASIS with our parametric LMT, which are the same adjustments, but it's implemented as an LMT that fits in the ASIS pipeline and get the same results. With the .cfe file, remember that the CDL on steroids, the extended CDL, then going back between all the different things. So anyway, yeah.
All right. Chase had a couple questions in regards to the FSHDR's workflow. So Chase, fire them off.
Hey, Bill.
Hey,
so I was just recently using the FSHDR, and the one thing I was curious about was the PQ output nit level. And if how that'll be received in final. Will they, so if I set it to 600 nits, will they see it all the way down the line at 600 nits, even if they're in have a 1,000 nit monitor, or I guess
it just depends. I mean, the theory behind that is that this is where the perceptual transform comes on, and said it's a perceptual rendering into the given working space. Say if your monitor can only do 600 nits, and you have another monitor can do 1,000 nits, then you should render it up the same. I mean, sure, you can do the same 600 nit rendering into the 1,000 nit monitor, and they're going to look the same because it's only going to go up to 600 nits. But if you want to take advantage of that additional range in that monitor, then you can let it go up. And the only thing you're going to see is that at the very, very top, the highlights will open up a bit, and there's a little bit of a perceptual adjustment to it. So the idea is that if you look at one, step away and look at the other, you should experience the same thing. And once again, the difference between 600 and 1,000 is very slight. But
yeah, I guess my biggest question was, like, will that be passed in like the CFE file? So like,
well, the CFE file does pass. It does contain what the viewing is, but typically that becomes a global setting for whatever environment you're going into. So you might have been working on a with a different set of primaries. Usually on HDR, we're all working. Most displays will do somewhere close to P3 primaries, and so at least we have that. But the idea is that that's in that CFE file. It's passed along as a reference as to what you're looking at. But if you're going to be making a 1,000 nit delivery, well, then let's look at it that way. And you should. I mean, I would like to see an example of somebody making a different grade adjustment based on that different rendering. The idea is that they should match. I mean,
we were with our little movie for Amazon and Film Nation, we were moving quickly, and we had a 600 nit monitor, and the DP was very much grading for the SDR, but fell in love with the HDR because of what the FSHDR was able to do by throttling the HDR effect. So it kind of it made everything a little simpler. Now there's like a little, I will say this just to get this on everybody's minds, to say this at the POMFort meeting, but like there needs to be a way to save CDLs inside of LiveGrade for when using the AJA FSHDR.
Well, it does support that with the control. It does save the CFE file.
In LiveGrade, I just tried to do it right now, and it only gave me a PFE and like a CFE file. But it
Maybe
wouldn't let-
Brandon has, I don't know if you have an example, but we can explain it, or we can do it offline and show you how to do that. But
yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But yeah,
No, it's all good.
That's a good question. You should be able to do that. I need to just take one quick second and step away for it. Can I do that? And maybe Brandon explain that, and I'll be right back in 30 seconds. Yep, right back.
Yeah, one of the things that we'll get to, I know his Windows box can do it, and there's been a couple of requests for it on the chat, is to kind of show the Colorfront engine plugin inside Resolve. I don't know what state it's currently in regards to his physical computer and which build he's running. So there might be some bugs or whatever in it, but it is something we've been trying to get into beta to get out to the users of the FSHDR, LiveGrade, and the Resolve Dailies guys that everybody uses, knowing that not everybody uses EXD as a dailies platform on set, or OSD, either one. So we are trying to get it to beta, and then coronavirus happened. So we were on track to do that, but due to the world situation, most of our local development for the EXD and Resolve plugin platform has kind of come to a bit of a crawl since, as you guys know, no one's really shooting. So we've refocused our development efforts into the cloud-based platforms that we've been working on. But as soon as things start to level off on the cloud side for us, we're hoping to have a bigger plugin beta that we can actually get to people to actually use and kind of show people how to use it, or the purpose of it in general. So in regards to the Sipple, your question on the plugin, we're actually trying to figure it out on the cost and everything associated with it. As I'm sure you guys all know, we're not exactly the $99 plugin company. So we're trying to figure out how we do that.
Right, you're not.
I think that one of the things that we are contemplating or thought and talked to various studios, et cetera, about, or people such as Technicolor, the big post houses or whatever, is since they have EXD and OSD licenses, whether it's a studio or a facility, to kind of just give them 100 licenses, and if you're doing a job with them, they give you a license out of their pool. But we haven't quite figured out how that works.
Really. No, we're trying to. In this room right here, that's a brave thing to say, Brandon. In this room right here, all you have is guys who are fans of your products. They're saying, "Oh, we're not going to get it. We can't afford it."
You guys, somehow you'll get it. Yeah, and then one of the things is I think likewise, FSHDR users will, there'll be some type of thing to use there. This is not a moneymaker for us. It's just, how do we support it? How do we distribute it and make sure people are able to use it correctly and everything. And
definitely not saying you're not going to not get it, Dave. Don't worry, you'll get it.
Getting it.
But it's a matter of the
not me. I know I'll get it.
No, it's the model behind it, because what a lot of people don't tend to take into, if you don't understand how subscription licensing on a licensed server and et cetera, and we don't want to have it to phone home every time you boot up because that's annoying. The backbone of supporting something like a plugin is a whole lot different than dealing with something where there's 300 EXD licenses in the world, where it's kind of automated, where if it was to spin up and everybody's using it, there's management behind it. And because Colorfront has always come out with the, for the users in the call that know us, you can open up bugs. If it's an emergency, we fix it relatively quickly, if not faster than most. And to switch into hey, here's a beta, here's a plugin, and then if it breaks or there's a problem, to change the mentality of we're going to fix it, but you're not going to get it overnight because it's a plugin. Where with Colorfront, if you have a problem with your transcoder and it's a blocker or, you know, whatever, there's a different response time in the sense of how you handle that when you charge a premium for your software versus $39.99 in the App Store, or you give it away for free and everybody just kind of gets their fixes whenever I feel like fixing it, unless I'm a special customer. So we want to keep that special customer across the board, with at the same time not burying our support team in resolve plugin problems. That's, you know, so it's an ebb and flow, but it's definitely not a you guys can't get it. There are a couple of DITs that do have early access alpha beta just to play with it for a little bit, but it's one of those things that you know, we want everybody to use it in conjunction with the other tools that we provide. So we're just figuring it all out. It's a thing that's a little bit different than how we typically do business. So,
but anyway, with the idea is to get it out there, and we, you know, we were inviting anybody to come by and see a demo at our office, and I guess depending on how long this quarantine is going to last, we'll have to get more creative to get some feedback, because we're looking for feedback too, you know, from you guys using it. So
yeah.
What else we got?
Chris Bolton, you had a couple questions, I think, that kind of all stacked up on top of each other. So
yeah,
throw them out.
First one again is kind of general and display side. What are your thoughts, Bill, on the whole HDR dark versus HDR bright modes?
Are you talking about on the consumer displays?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there is only, if we're in a professional side, there is only one mode. And let's maybe back up a little bit. If we're the encoding system for HDR, typically in the professional side is PQ, Perceptual Quantizer, or 2084. What that is it's basically a particular code value must produce a particular nit output on the display. So there is no light or dark mode. I've seen, even on some quote unquote professional monitors, different things on it, but it's very specific, is that you know, here is the color palette and here is the brightness level, and it should be the same across everything. On the different consumer displays, it's like we've all been used for. There's a ton of different things in there. I have found that some of the default things, like there's Technicolor mode in some of the white OLED displays from LG. And the more recent ones, that one comes up pretty close to being, you know, being accurate as far as a particular code, the right code value goes in. For example, in the PQ thing, we have a value that goes all the way, you know, from 0 to 1, and that range of 0 to 1, if it's at 1, it should be 10,000 nits on the display, and if it's at 0, it should be no light coming off the display. A value of 0.504 blah 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 produces 100 nits. 0.75 and a little change produces 1,000 nits, and those are specific numbers, and that's what should be coming off of display. And if we're using a consumer display, we need to either calibrate it or assure that that we're getting the same thing so that it works right. And it's what the average consumer does at home as far as adjusting things. It's you know, our industry's been trying to push default modes, and it seems to be gaining some traction. That's, like I said, Technicolor's worked on some. Netflix has an agenda with some of the manufacturers that if you click their button, that it should correspond to the proper thing. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question in a long-winded way, but I don't know what monitor you're referring to, or you saw bright and dark modes, but probably neither one of them corresponds to proper calibration. But most of the LG type white OLED displays from most of the manufacturers can be calibrated up pretty darn close. Certainly, there's some good software out there to do that, to make it work right. I mean, SpectraCal's been pretty good. I mean, as far as working with our industry and having presets and calibration software to guarantee whatever and recommendations as to which display you can accurately calibrate. So,
all right. Next question is from Jamie.
Hey, Bill, just curious, like, do you feel like we're at a point now where we can be doing things on set from like a DIT perspective that everyone can be doing, or are we still trying to find our way in like the HDR scope? You know what I mean? Like, is there like a tried and true path yet? I mean, we know about the FSHDR, but are there more tools coming down the road or down the pike, and are there more approaches that might be better, let's say?
Well, I mean, you know, I think as far as, I'll just give a little broader perspective on that. You know, traditionally before HDR came in and before digital cameras came in, a DP would light a scene and adjust his ratios with his meter and use his eye, and usually have pretty good results. And digital cameras came in, and the first recommendation with the good quality digital cameras when they came in is do the same thing. And you're going to be, if you have a proper pipeline afterward, you will have something. Once again, you're not doing any onset preview other than just contextual or for framing and that type of thing. Then we started coming to the concept. Well, let's see an accurate preview, and that's been a hard thing. I mean, I haven't seen too many good solutions out there. Different. Like I said, as different camera manufacturers will come out with a Rec 709 on their output. They all look different. That's what they thought should be a rendering. And of course, if everybody used that same rendering all the way through the pipeline, I guess we'd all hopefully see the same thing. But usually they're renderings to one kind of a monitor. So it's pretty chaotic and not a lot of good choices. That's been one of the things that I've been very passionate about, is that if we're going to look at a picture on set and rely on it, it better be standardized and something that means something. Otherwise, I've seen so many times throughout my career of images coming in where someone's relied on some form of, they saw a picture on set and they adjusted the lighting and exposure, everything else based on that image, and it didn't serve them very well. I mean, you have stuff overexposed, underexposed, and things like that. So if we are going to rely from a creative standpoint on the display on set, then it really needs to be accurate. And I still challenge, a DP is that it better make sense with your light meter, what you're seeing. I mean, if your eye and your years of experience on balancing the lighting and setting the stop on the camera produces an image that's way, way wrong, and you have to start changing that to compensate, something's not matching up and something's not right. And that's why, my previous career at eFilm, when we were going out on set with digital things, we had preview systems that were the best you could do with the hardware you had at the time, but we were still doing the same type of accurate thing. And now I think it's been dramatized with the FSHDR of having a managed color workflow built into the box that allows you to replicate it along the line and also rely on what you're seeing as meaningful, as long as the display equipment is correct. I mean, you can hook up a miscalibrated or inappropriate display to the FSHDR and not be any better off. I mean, you can make mistakes there too. So, but with the proper things, it's really good. And then, like I was saying earlier, now that we're capturing HDR, there's not a lot of memory. In other words, innate memory in a DP's mind as to, well, where should I adjust the ratio of the highlights versus, the practical lights versus the rest of the scene, because there hasn't been enough experience just to do it with the meter and look at it. We really need to see it. And I think as we're going to this increased capture range, we may always need to see that. And that's where it becomes important to see the balance. Sure, if that practical light is upstaging the actor because it's just too bright, it may be technically correct, this is something the DP should have some feedback on while he's on set and adjust it there. Yeah, we can certainly bring it down and do some corrections after. In fact, we've got a good set of tools that are designed just for doing that. It'd be better to get it in camera and walk away and be happy. So I think that's where the emphasis on accurate display on set is really getting up there, and that's where you know, also the size, keep coming back to it, the size of the display. If we're looking at high dynamic range images with this increased range and palette and capability, seeing it on a very, very small monitor becomes difficult. And also seeing it on a monitor where, you know, we've always faced this dilemma on set where if you're standing out in the lights and things, your eye needs some rest time to compensate to whatever the viewing environment's going to be so that you see a good image. So we always have a little disparity there. But yeah, good displays are certainly accurate display, and proper management is I think very, very new. I mean, different companies have done that. I mean, and there have been different you know, single use case solutions people have come up with. Some of them quite good. But as far as a industry-wide thing that's democratized across the industry, that's what's really needed, and that's what we're trying to work toward. We're not going to, you know, our main interest is then when people move into our platforms, you know, we work with Palm Fort, we have the FSHDR on set. That's not a mainstream business for it, but it helps all the other pieces that we touch. If the images aren't properly captured, and we can't communicate the looks between post-production and out on set, then our products our mainstream products aren't able to shine. So that's our interest in trying to wrap this whole end-to-end management around it, and you know, and our interest in having the industry adopt it as much as it can, and help us grow it to meet what the current needs are. So.
All right, one of the things I missed, we're going to step back a little bit. Chris, you had an LMT CTL question earlier that I missed.
Yeah, it's, excuse me, sorry. I'm not super familiar with OSD, but does OSD have the ability to actually create, shall we say, creative looks that can be implemented correctly in an ASIS pipeline? So beyond CDL control, so something that has like secondary adjustments or...
Well, we do have, I mean, and you're talking about in an ASIS pipeline, on what platform?
Well, just as an example, I mean, a lot of DPs like to have their little displaylet that they like to use that has a specific type of color palette and tonality, etc. Mm-hmm. Is there a reasonable way to implement something similar that works correctly in an ASIS pipeline? I mean,
yes,
I've done older workflows where it was a bit of a hodgepodge of using inverse IDTs, ODTs to implement a 64 cube LUT, which is not strictly a great way to do things.
Yeah, well, the answer to your question, yes, and we don't have to ship LUTs around. We can just ship around the Colorfront CFE file, that text file we were talking about earlier, and that can be implemented either in the Colorfront node-based pipeline, the standard CFE pipeline, or it can be a stock ASIS pipeline that has an LMT put in it, and that's as we progress with the plugin environment, this can be run, of course, in all the Colorfront products right now. That works. This is compatible with Palm Fort, and it's interchangeable. In other words, if you have a Colorfront engine pipeline and you set the looks and you store them on a CFE file, you can then import that CFE file into an ASIS pipeline with the Colorfront LMT, and it will take those settings and you'll get the same replication of the look. So that's the kind of portability that's there. And you know, if someone says, well, I want to set up, for example, my Resolve, or I want to set up my OSD with just a stock with an ASIS pipeline, then in the new OSD, then there's also the LMT, and you just bring that up, and this is in beta right now. I can show it to you here on the screen.
Yeah, I was going to ask Bill, do you have the Resolve plugin on your system, or do you want to show them how it would work, how it basically works inside Transcoder?
I guess I can do. Let me just try this. No guarantees here. I'm on a dev build that I just got fresh, I think, yesterday morning. So let's see if it all works. So what I did here is that there's just these wizards for creating a. So here's an ASIS with LMT. So this should work. And if I go back, yeah. See, so I have the same picture I had before. So we have a basic ASIS pipeline. We may or may not need this because the LMT actually replaces the CDL, but if you want a CDL, you have it. But you have the LMT, which within the LMT, you have the standard CDL controls that, I'll just go back to the image, that we have the standard CDL controls, like slope and, et cetera. And if we go over here, we've got the look files. We can, go to master look bright. We can go to, the different film stocks are all in there. Our whole palette of different looks are available, or just go back to our default master look. And then within that LMT, just that we're talking about, we have the scene referred exposure control and, the color temperature. Intent, and then so it basically if we go back to the thing, we see basically the LMT is here in the ASIS AP0 linear light as an LMT is supposed to be, and it does everything. We can get rid of this, we can get rid of this, we can get rid of this, and just have just the LMT, and we should have a proper image there. And this does everything. So all we're doing in this case, when I'm coming in with these source frames or EXR frames that are so I don't need an IDT for them. If I had a camera file, then I need an IDT to go into ASIS AP0 linear. Say if it were a log C camera, then I just have the IDT going into that. But so, and then what's really nice about this is if we're doing the CDL control, we can decide what color space I want my CDL controls to behave in. I can knob around in log C, I can knob around in ASIS-CCT, and with this one, S-log3, red, wide gamma is going to be added to that, and whatever other ones people want. It's very simple. But so obviously the knobs will behave differently. If I do a power on this or something, then of course it's going to look different if I go to the different gammas. Not so much the S-log, but the ASIS-CCT does, because S-log3 and log C are quite similar in their curves.
Yeah, and Brian, that goes back to a little bit of your question earlier about the Resolve ability to take various cameras and bring them all into a similar color space. This is exactly what that
Yeah,
does.
and in Resolve, this what you would do in Resolve is that you can just do a default Resolve ASIS pipeline, and then you just bring the Colorfront LMT into that, and you have the same controls. So whatever settings I do here with this one, I can save it as the .cfe file. I can go back out the set and load it in Palm 4. I can go into Resolve and put the ASIS LMT in there, or the Colorfront engine. Either way, it's going to produce the same results. And basically, in this LMT overrides what's going on in ASIS. So in other words, it allows you to go beyond, overrides the stock RRT and ODT and puts all the Colorfront's color science in there. So it's and that's a real big difference. I mean, today, maybe there's some other software, but the basic ASIS is not designed to have the same look in its SDR rendering or its HDR rendering. I mean, they're completely two different things. You do completely different grades and everything. With the Colorfront philosophy is that we should be able to punch between HDR and SDR and have the look remain the same. Obviously, we'll have more dynamic range, and you might want to trim because of that to take advantage of it, but the basic look should remain the same. And if we are implementing the Colorfront engine as the CFE LMT within an ASIS pipeline, you have the exact same thing. So it makes it work. It sort of realizes the original founding goals of the ASIS is that it should be a common knobbing space, and then the ODT should be able to render to whatever kind of display device, communicate the same look. And of course, that hasn't gotten to that point. One of the other things that I think you guys probably face a lot is getting back to LED and synthetic lighting. And remember the first thing I was talking about, if we look over here on Cliff's, you got your CIE chart sitting behind you. If we're out on the outer edges of that chart shooting LED lights, that's where the color management becomes very, very critical, because the cameras will generate these super saturated colors that if you do the math on it, they don't relate to any real world colors. They're way outside any color that can exist in nature, but there's synthetic colors that go out there. With the proper management like we do, we bring those colors back in. So, and I don't have that demo up here, but I've got some good demos of stuff where we can see what it looks like with the stock ASIS, because right now, and ASIS is being improved. In fact, I'm part of it, and I was part of the original founding thing, is that it's going to get improved. But with this tool set, then those colors get mapped back into usable colors that you can grade with, and they don't produce the purple aliasing and all the other problems that you have with these extreme colors that are coming from cameras. And this is really, I don't know how many images I've been sent by different people. I encourage you, if you have some problem images that are aggravating a render, I'd love to get them just to prove out everything we're doing. But with the right out-of-gamut managing throughout the whole pipeline, then we shouldn't be producing artifacts. We should be able to handle any of the colors that come from the cameras and render them properly, no matter what the dynamic range is. So.
All right, one of the things that I think comes up that, or at least I've seen a lot, is Sony Venice, and I know you guys all. Oh, Chris has got a question, but is the Sony Venice output out of the SDI and matching and 64 to 1023, and the rationale and the reasoning behind that. Can you kind of explain what might be? I know you don't, we're not Sony, but maybe explain why someone would want to do 64 1023 versus any other SDI output.
Well, here let's just talk about a little bit, and basically what I was just talking about earlier about these extreme colors come into this too. It's just that when you cap a camera, it shouldn't have any exposure and there shouldn't be anything coming out, but there is. There's noise that's generated by the sensors. So you want to encode all that noise. So most cameras, some of them take different approaches to it. Sony has put lens capped at, in 10-bit jargon or 10-bit scale at 64, and left the bottom range to be able to include some of the noise. And if we think about the noise, that noise can be single pixel noise on one sensor. And if we go back to what we were talking about earlier, is that we have the IDTs that, in real crude terms, one thing they really have to do a lot of is boost the saturation to split out the fact that there's overlap between the sensors. So if you have noise coming from one sensor, it will be a very extremely saturated color, which say like if that's rendered into S-log3, can produce some negative numbers. And if we just chop those off, we have if you clip the noise, it looks funny and it also accentuates the noise. So that's the main thing, is it's a way to encode the noise so we can properly deal with it later in the chain. A lot of systems just clip it off anyway, and you're back to back to zero, but literally. If you handle it properly, you have that extra headroom. In ASIS, I'm in log C. The zero lens cap is not zero. It's set up. I mean, it's at a, I forget what the exact number is, but anyway, it's not at zero. So it also accommodates, even if you encode it in 0 to 1023, it accommodates the negative numbers. And that's been, a known thing, and it's done with various techniques with different manufacturers. So that, I think that's the, you know, I'm not Sony, but that's certainly talking with their engineers. That's the rationale for preserving this lower end blacks and setting it up like that. And this is just, you know, an artificial space. What comes out of the camera, that's not what you record. This is just, that's not done when you have a Sony RAW file, but this is just, you know, a viewing space or an artificial space that comes out, and that's the proper thing. When it goes into FSHDR, it handles that properly. It handles that negative noise properly so that it doesn't amplify the noise, and so it's all properly handled. And as you switch the IDT on the FSHDR for the different cameras, all of the ranging and everything is taken care of. The one camera that I remember is ARRI, which I think they fixed that, but there was a choice of coming out legal or full, and of course you want to make sure that that's set right when you're coming out the log C tap, coming out as log C on the camera. So I think the later ones that's just been full range, but the earlier ones it was not. You could switch between the two, and I remember way back that was always a problem, that you had to make sure that was set properly.
It's actually only legal now.
It's, yeah, or only legal. Yeah, it's only one way. That's right. Yeah. So that, I think, avoids that problem. Yep. Okay, cool.
Chris, I see you have your hand up. What's the question, my friend?
Yeah, so the question is, when you're talking about sort of on the fringe colors, are you talking about like, I forget how you say the word exactly, metamerisms?
Well, this is a form of metamerism.
That's it.
Typically, a metamerism, and cameras do have metamerisms. It's more widely used on the display side and with our eyes and how we see things. But a camera is, if you think about it, if we didn't want to have it be metameric, we would have to have a whole range of sensors in there that sample different spectral frequencies. And if you look at calibration, we have two instruments that we use. We have a spectroradiometer, which are the better instruments, like a PR instrument for photo research, or we have the colorimeters. And when you're measuring a monitor and calibrating it, if you have a spectroradiometer that does a whole bunch of in-between samples up and down, it's good to go across a whole wide range of monitors. If we're going with a colorimeter that just has 3 samples, then you have to have a compensation for every spectral distribution from different monitors. And so the same thing is with the camera. With a camera, it's not practical with today's technology to sample more than 3 primaries. I mean, there have been some people proposing, well, we should do 6. Well, even that would break the, you know, we'd have way more data, and then also we'd lose sensitivity for dividing the light up. And of course, and 6 wouldn't really help all that much. So yes, there is that metameric difference when we have very narrow spectrum, and metamerics really come in when we have only, you know, very narrow single spectrum light. I mean, LEDs are very, very narrow spectrum, not quite as bad as laser light, which is just a single wavelength, but that aggravates the problem, and then that's where we have to handle that. And like I said, is that in those extremes, even with proper handling, you could probably take an ARRI and a red, and I haven't seen side by side on the same thing, but I would imagine even with proper handling where we don't artifact and it makes a good picture, we will see some slight differences on those very extreme things from an LED light may render and look slightly different. And that's beyond the ability of an IDT to really make that match. I mean, in all cases, I mean, you might have a match under one particular wavelength and then you change it and then it's not going to be. So, but for what we're calling the pointer colors, or the ones that are inside, if you look at that CEIE chart there, they're the colors that are well inside the triangle that are just normal real world colors that exist in the real world. Most cameras reproduce those with the proper IDT quite well. So, any other questions?
I have a follow-up to that question.
Yeah.
And I haven't done a ton of onset HDR grading, mostly when it comes to just sort of doing tests. But to your experience, I find when doing any type of grading to live content from a camera versus actually doing it after the fact, after you've ingested the raw materials. But there just seems to be just a massive quality difference between an output stream from a camera and what you can actually get when you're in the post end. Do you think that's a concern?
Well, there shouldn't be. If we're doing it properly. I mean, if I take our use case with FSHDR with its controls, I mean, obviously in post-production, we have color correction tools that are not in the FSHDR. They could be, but they're not because of just the scope of the development. But we have basic CDL and exposure and controls like this and a whole look library. Those are every bit as extensive as they would be, you know, coming out of the camera. Say if we take an ARRI camera coming out log C, and then I go back into post-production, and I have the .ARI file and a debearing and working. They'll be the same. We will, you know, we'll have the same latitude. We'll see the same colors throughout the whole thing. It's just that if I get on a post-production color corrector, even like with Colorfront, I have more color adjustments and things that I can do if I want to take it out there beyond just the CDL and the scene referred exposure and color temperature and tint controls and look library that I can do because I have more controls. And but the latitude I have on the image, they should be interchangeable. And I've often found if there is a discrepancy, this is because we have apples and bananas. We have one system doing something out on set. We may be color correcting. I've seen the worst case scenario where people are taking Rec 709 out of the camera and putting a CDL on top of that. And of course, there's no latitude, and that's just plain wrong to ever do that. But I've seen that, and people say, well, I have no latitude with that. And then I get into post-production where I'm properly working ahead of the output transform in the, you know, log space or native space of the camera, and now I have much more latitude. So certainly in that case there would be. So.
And then my final question is a product question. I don't know if you say anything yet, or if you're gonna have any product releases, but does Colorfront have any sort of more compact DC powered look generating devices coming that's in a smaller form factor for us remote applications?
There are things I can't go into a lot of details, but yes, there are things in the works right now that would certainly lend itself to a much smaller form factor, maybe not with all the extensibility, but and all the channels, but certainly a direct interchange. I mean, the looks and the control functionality would be the same, but yeah, that's being worked on with smaller form factor, definitely, and that should roll out sometime soon. We'll keep you posted when that comes out. You'd be the first ones to want to use that. And then, yeah, so it'll be great for second unit too, that you can just load it up and plug it in. And especially now that we're getting, like I said earlier, better displays for, you know, being out on set that are more accurate and lending themselves to HDR and stuff. So. Yeah. Any other questions?
More questions? I'm going to stop your screen share real quick, or if you want to stop your screen share.
Yeah, I can do that real quick.
And I'll share mine really quick. Since I'm sure many people have or have not seen it. So this is an example of a CFE file. I made this one when I was at during our event a couple weeks ago, or well over a month ago now, at Sony, when we kind of demoed all of our various technologies, including the CFE, the plugin, FSHDR, the analyzer, transcoder, cloud, all the good fun stuff that we're doing. And so this exports out of live grade. And what kind of separates it, obviously, from your standard CDL is, you know, here's your normal CDL that everybody knows and loves and or hates. But inside the CFE file, you've got your clip processing data. We're working through some of the bugs with this section here to get the information through the FSHDRs with the manufacturers of the cameras to find out if they're sending it down bank or HVANC or how they're sending all the metadata through so it carries properly. And then you've got your input color science. So when I send this to Jamie or to Dave in New York, I don't need to tell them what input color space I was working in. I don't need to describe what I was doing to make these numbers physically work because it's all inside the file. This is in a JSON format, so it's easily editable. I can come in here and say, that's now 85 and save it. I can change this. But you have your input color space. So I'm coming in from a Sony camera. Then I'm going into my scene referred exposure adjustments. So I'm actually adjusting color, temperature, tint, and exposure in scene referred. Then I'm even telling you what color space I was actually doing my grading in.
Very important for a CDL.
Yeah. Then I've got my CDLs. Then I've got my look. So the look that I was creating inside the FSHDR via live grade, and then my output color space and what I was monitoring in. But this can easily be changed to, and when you import this into, say, Resolve or wherever the tool set, into that plugin, it knows that your ODT is 709, 100 nits, or I can go back and say HDR10, and it knows that the output device transform is set for HDR10, and all these in between, and Bill can go into more detail, but these don't change because this changed. They're independent of each other.
I think it gets back. Who was it that asked the question about a DP having having his default looks or his, his mass, his look that he wants to have portable and take it around? And it used to be maybe a lookup table, but a lookup table is very deficient because you got to know what color space it's meant to work with coming in. You got to know what it's coming out. This is independent. So if you take the input transform away and the output transform, you've now got your look. And quite frankly, if we changed cameras, we just changed the IDT and we're still applying that same look. And then if we're looking at it on a Rec 709 monitor, we're looking at it on a P3 monitor, we're looking at it on an HDR monitor or whatever, that's all that has to be changed. So yeah, it's a portable thing. And some thoughts we've had is that we may, to preserve exclusivity, this could be an encrypted file, have an encrypted mode that the DP could have that only he can have and load, and it would prevent someone from, it's his. But right now, you take that away, you don't have to carry a LUT around. You have something that's better than a LUT, and then you can render that look anywhere you want. And then, of course, you're not stuck with that look. You can sit there and iterate on top of it, make a trim one way or the other, resave it as a new look, or just have it specific for that show, but you have your basic default look. So that makes it pretty powerful there.
I see Chris and Mike Zippel both have questions about that. So Chris first, then Mike.
Just back to, actually, it's for you, Brandon. That file you were showing. Does it consider the camera's ranged output? So whether it's a legal extended or Venice's custom output, does it consider any of that, or is that just a transformation that happens automatically and it's reading everything sort of in a full range data signal?
It doesn't care. Yeah, it doesn't care. I mean, all that is handled. That's on the input side. That's all properly handled. Just like we were talking about earlier with ARRI, you had to take that into consideration as to, you had to make sure that you had the right handshake. But with the FSHDR, it's and especially with ARRI now that it's always consistent, that's all taken care of. This doesn't compensate. That's all taken care of on the input side, whether it's whatever the ranging is on your things, and the hardware is handling that. And that file, as Brandon was showing, is that you can manually edit it if you want, but of course you load that into any of the software that supports it, from all the transcoder products to say PalmFord or DaVinci Resolve, and you generate the file, and then of course you can load it in, and then you could, with the GUI, just sit there and edit it, change it, see it change the color, and then publish a new file with the new name.
Right. Just with the Sony ecosystem, they have so many cameras, for example, that all the cameras.
You do need to make sure whatever since the look itself is a virtual look, I mean, it's agnostic to what the input source is, and it's agnostic to what the output ODT is, then of course, you want to make sure you have the proper IDT on. I mean, if you're, most Sony cameras support the same IDTs, but it's very important that if you have the output set to S-log3 S-gamut .cine, that the FSHDR and everything is set to the same thing, so that we have a handshake. And you know, in fact, I mean, you can go to the Sony camera and change it to S-log3 S-gamut, and then you change the FSHDR to S-gamut, and it'll be 100% the same color. You can change it to the original gamut, or you can change it to the original S-log. The only thing with the original S-log, it doesn't encode as much of the camera range as the S-log3 does. The S-log2 does, but that's why it came with S-log2, and then the S-log3. They came out with that is because the S-log2, if people wanted to color grade in that space, it didn't behave as nice. So, but they basically are interchangeable. I mean, it's just so that you have the same on the in as you have on the out. It's the same thing.
All right, Jamie, your question, buddy.
Oh, hey, two questions. So this CFE that you guys are talking about, is this, this is in live grade now, right?
Yes.
And then, so I'm assuming if I export a look into like a .cfe, send it to Colorfront or, you know, EXD or OSD, like if you guys say made a tweak, say we're setting a look for a show or something like that, you guys can make a tweak, send it back to me, and I can just open it back up in live grade and see what the tweaks were, et cetera.
Yep, that's the exact idea, is that you can take it from set, send it back to wherever it needs to be, or if you're in prep or wherever. And if someone's in a more color controlled environment or wants to make a little bit more of a tweak, they can do that and then send it right back to you. And it's just a small, you know, not even a K size file that moves around, right. Really relatively lightweight.
And you guys are seeing this as like a CDL 2.0 that you were referencing earlier?
Yeah, I think that's how like we see it like as it's open to everybody, you know, like we're not locking it off and saying only one person can use it. Yeah. So the idea is like, you know, we've talked to the ASIS people about it. Like, look at, you guys aren't quite there yet. This is what we're working on. Here's what it looks like. So we've had a lot of conversations with them in the sense of the interoperability of it kind of moving around from place to place.
And the thing is, with just the CDL that we've all passed around, in my experience, most cases it fails because that's only a set of color parameters. We don't have any concept as to what color space it was applied on,
right.
What transform was, the IDT was coming in, and we don't have any idea of what the ODT or the output transforms are, or what kind of display or monitor is viewed on, and all those things. So it's really an extension of that concept with additional controls and things that we can adjust, especially the scenery fruit controls, which I think are very important. You know, camera exposure and color temperature are the things that vary in most cases between shots. And those are the first things you want to tweak before you get to creative CDL type controls. So,
yeah, I think this is great because if you just send off like a list of CDLs with, let's just say you make the cardinal sin without sending any reference images of what you did, you know, whoever's applying them just kind of has to cross their fingers and hope that they're getting it right. When now you have all this information that explains what your intent without you being in the room, which I think is super important.
Yeah, and then the viewing transform, you know, I mean, the best case when CDLs work is that the same viewing LUT is interchanged with everybody, but then the problem is somebody says, oh, well, now I'm going to view it on a P3 display. Oops, it doesn't work, you know, and of course this is independent. There's the look, and then the output transform is all independent. So yeah, we think it should work. We're always looking for suggestions, but we think this kind of like makes it a virtual independent virtual look that can then be interchanged between different places. And
awesome. One more kind of follow-up question, totally unrelated. Are you guys making, or not you, but is AJA making a mini FSHDR? This kind of tails on Chris's question. Like, we don't need 64 bits of or channels of audio. We just want the smallest 12 volt box possible.
there's
A
no
lot of stuff we
promises and things
can
in
say or
who
not
is-
say.
You can say it.
but certainly there's a concerted-
It's
there's a
only going on
concerted
YouTube.
effort
It's
to come
totally
up
fine. Conversations are being had, you know, with various things and kind of looking into what the future could bring. Obviously, with COVID happening, it's kind of like I said earlier, kind of changed the directions of where we're specifically focused, but knowing that there's going to be a back end to all of this. So conversations are definitely happening, but nothing
it's more
official.
it's well in the development works to have some smaller equipment there. That's certainly
It's been the thing since
appreciated.
it's been a thing since we started talking about the film mode in the CFE. The very first thing was, can you make it smaller? That was the very first comment from the first person we showed it to. So working on it.
The other thing that I think is, and maybe we can cover that the next time, is also, if I share my screen again.
And then I also have something to show on my screen when you're done, Bill.
Okay. Yeah.
Jamie's got another question.
Okay. So basically, it's this, and I won't go into a lot of it, but this, and I don't have it set up right now, but that's how do we view, you know, waveforms of images. I mean, typically what we look at on set is whatever's coming out of the back of the camera, which is pretty much meaningless. And we do have a mode, and I'll take more time later to show that, but I think this works very well. If I go to this, and go to camera, and I set this, and this won't be right because it's not looking at the right thing, but I'll set it to, say, area log C. You can see, if I make this larger, and this is the product that we have out on set, which is the analyzer that's a companion product to the FSHDR. Now we're able to view this in terms of camera stop, and you can, instead of, and this would be the same across all cameras. So I don't know how many times I've been out on set where people are looking at log C and then they're looking at S log and there's a grease mark on the waveform monitor. This is where the face should be for this camera and for that camera. Well, this is agnostic. It starts with, let me just darken the image so we can see it a little better. Yeah. So you can see here that this is in camera stops, and this is at 18% gray. You can set where 0 is, but typically set for 8% gray. So we can actually use this tool. If we pick on the image, we can actually, you know, pick on the left cheek versus the right cheek and get the key fill ratio, and it will match what the light meter is. And it's the same across all cameras as opposed to being looking at the log signal. And then of course the unit out on set can switch to output referred and look at the PQ or the Rec 709 if you want to see that. But this I find really, really useful for the DP or anybody working with cameras on set, because we're seeing it in a scene referred mode. We're seeing what's coming in. We see how many stops over highlight is, and etc. And that I think is quite a unique tool, that we finally have something out on set that's meaningful, relates to the metric that we talk about, and it's the same across all cameras, because the same IDT that's in the FSHDR, the same things are supported in the analyzer. So it's a great tandem product, so that you can properly view things out on set. So maybe we can spend some more time with that on another session and set things up and show you. And then maybe another session is one where we try to either at our office if this quarantine's over, or we'll do a virtual one where we can show more end to end, where we have the Palm Fort and the FSHDR and then dailies, and then the final color grade either in rendering in transcoder or in Resolve with the plugin, and show how all this stuff interchanges.
Yeah, and on that, if you want to stop your screen share real quick, Bill.
There we go.
And then I will screen share mine. So what you guys are looking at is I've got a really quick, it took a minute. I was doing it in the background. So sorry, Jamie, I lost some tracking on the timestamps. But
me too.
I got most of them. It's just when I was trying to troubleshoot the plugin to get it working. So yeah, so here it is. You got Resolve running. I haven't done anything. I literally just brought in some area material, haven't set any preferences, just kind of wanted to show a basic going of the plugin. We've got the Colorfront engine plugin. So if you go to your OFX plugins, this OFX plugin will, in theory, go into any OFX plugin supported platform. So you're talking Nuke, Maya, potentially Baselight, but they do things very odd with their VFX libraries and how they write them. But as you can see, you got your Colorfront engine, your Colorfront look, your IDT, ODT, and an ASIS LMT plugin. What I've just dropped onto the timeline, this is a ARRI raw file. I've got my Colorfront engine plugin, and I can simply say this is log C. I'm going to HDR10 or I'm going to 709. And then I can actually come in here and make my exposure adjustments as if I'm operating inside my FSHDR or inside EXD, or, you know, so this transfers through all the things. I've got my CDL adjustments. I've got my grading spaces. I've got my look control. So I can say, you know, I'm going to do, let's see, I'm going to do a bleach, and I'm going to mix it with Fuji XD, you know, create a custom look and actually make my adjustments here as, say, a finished colorist setting a look. Then I can also export this or import CFEs from set. One of the things that unfortunately OFX doesn't. Hey, hello.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm just in the office. I've been on a.
Somebody has to be muted.
Hey, Patrick.
About
Mute. Forgot.
This work stuff.
Muting.
And we're about to have dinner, but I thought I'd give you a.
Well, Patrick's about to have dinner, everybody. So, did I mute myself, or can you guys still hear me? Uh-oh, hit the wrong button.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. So yeah, one of the things that OFX doesn't support is the ability to open up a browser window when importing files. It's a limitation to OFX plugins. It's inherent. All of them have it. So to import a CFE, you actually have to manually put in the location, but we're working on a Fusion script that you would launch. You go into Fusion, launch the script, say, these are my CFEs. These are all my original medias. This is where it lives. This is my EDL. Load everything. And it can be any media. If it has a matching CDL, it'll auto-populate and build your entire Resolve timeline with the associated CFE file brought into it. But I see that a couple people raised their hands. So before I go on a thing, we got Luke. You have a question, or is that?
Yeah, I was just curious about the HDR amount slider there.
Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, so I'll explain that. That's basically the rendering in the highlight area, and it's just a dynamic range amount, and we can push it up. I mean, Brandon can slide it up. I can't do it here, but you can see, even with an SDR image, it's going to push it up. This will be quite dramatic in HDR since you can go brighter. And sometimes this is a perfect control that if you happen to have a shot and it's already been in the can and you got a bright window behind an actor's face, it's basically will bring the lighting down without changing anything in the color balance and the gray relationships remain constant. It's almost like you just lessen the light on the brighter objects, so you can bring them down. And then, of course, if you really want to boost the HDR-ness of it, you can go the opposite way and really brighten it up and make it really, you know, get it all the way up to a really bright, non-dramatic HDR, but normally in the center. So that's an override for that, and it can be part of a creative tool. And then, of course, the ambient surround. This, I think, is broken. If in this one, yeah it is. Yeah.
It's
but
been
anyway,
broken.
the ambient surround I showed you. Yeah, that's a bug. That's the same one I had shown you earlier that you can adjust. You know, when I forget who it was that asked about how do you set the black on the or the bias on a monitor, but that's a control for compensating. If you're on set and you're and it's getting pretty bright, you would bring that ambient surround up. If you're in just a normal dim surround, you leave it in the middle. And if you in a complete blackout where it's completely black, the experience the same thing, then you'd bring it down. At some time in our industry, there's some work going on as to try to parameterize the viewing surround. And if that ever comes about, then we could actually put some metric numbers that relate to that. But right now, it basically goes between normal and very, very dark viewing environment. Like if we're rendering something at 110 or 109 nits for Dolby Cinema, which is what the brightest is. It's the reason Dolby Cinema works is that it's not that it only gets twice as bright as a normal cinema, but it gets very black. And so the room itself is really darkened down. And so that's where when you're generating an output for that and want to view it on that kind of environment, you bring the surround all the way down. So
we got questions or hands raised from Chris and then Jamie.
So I have two questions. When you activate this plugin, does it sort of deactivate the color management of Resolve? And my follow-up question is, the ambient surround setting that you're adjusting, is that actually tracked in the CFE?
Yes,
it is tracked in the CFE, and you can bring this Colorfront plugin in. I mean, the question is that you can have this single one. This is probably not how a colorist in the final version would use it. He would bring it in the individual components where we have the input device transform, and then the ODT ahead of that, and then go into the full tool set of Resolve. We would come out in whatever color grading space that you want to grade in Resolve. Say you want to work in log C or ASIS CCT, then you can send that to the Resolve color corrector, and you have every control in Resolve to work with, and you still are bookending it with the Colorfront workflow. Likewise, you can just hit the default, set it up as a ASIS project in Resolve, and then just bring the LMT in, and you're going to have the same thing. And you can still in Resolve, you have the resources, the full resources Resolve in the same color grading space. And so there's a number of combinations, but it's not replacing Resolve, it's augmenting Resolve with a managed color workflow on both input and output. And then in case of Resolve, if you didn't want the scene referred, or you didn't want to, or you could use the Resolve's IDTs, which pretty much they match what ours are. You could use that and then go into our scene referred color mode, and then come out of that into whatever color space you want to grade in Resolve, say ACCCT, do Resolve, and then have our look and set the look, and then have our, pick whatever look combination and fade between them, and then you pick our ODT output to couple it to the particular display you have. And so you have the full resources of Resolve, so it really enhances Resolve with full end-to-end color management and allow you to do various things. And in fact, if you want to get fancy, you can have the look mode and scene referred mode in a layer, and then you can do shapes between the layers. You get pretty fancy, as a lot of final colorists do, and this really augments that. I've had some where they've done a layer with the different looks and do a shape around it to do something in one part of the image and do another look in another part of an image, and then of course you can put transitions on it. I mean, you can go to town on it. So.
All right, Jamie, your turn.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Bill, Vernon, just curious, everything inside that Colorfront plugin, is that, say you want to share that with somebody, everything that you just showed us is all in the JSON file, or is it,
yes.
Does that grow too big?
No,
everything that's ours is shared in the JSON file. The one thing we can't do is if you were to say our IDT and then a bunch of nodes from Resolve and then come back to us, our stuff would transfer, but we can't pull any of the way Resolve writes their database. We can't actually pull all that information. So if you were to do like a keyframe and a track for like a 7-minute shot, like we couldn't pull any of that information. All we could pull was the color information.
I guess what I was saying is if you used you know, a LUT inside of the LMT or something, would it link to that, or tell the person down the line what LUT you were using? Like, how do you keep track of external
Not yet,
things?
but I know that's on the list to try to grab
right.
at least those kind of things, but that's not working quite yet.
And also, do you both see us using this plugin once it's stable and ready? Like, do you guys see us using this all the time in commercials?
I think commercials would be really great. I think, just getting all from commercials, that commercials are just now thinking about HDR, and you know, and so I think this whole managed workflow is going to really take off for commercial work. You know, being able to preview on set, see how it looks in SDR, HDR, and then being able to translate it through the final finish. I think this will get used a lot.
This and just, I feel like I know the answer to this, but the CFE works. There's an Avid plugin, right? Because it's OFX, right?
It in theory works. I loaded this exact plugin, this exact version into Avid. I'm gonna go. It worked, but there's some work to do. Resolve was obviously the first. Yeah, the Resolve was the first step, because a lot of people have come up to us going, as you know, crazy as it might sound, log dailies, where the dailies get delivered in log and the CFE gets put in into the dailies as a quote sidecar file, and then inside the Avid plugin, it can see the CFEs, loads the CFEs, and then they can actually make adjustments and send those around, which then led to the idea of, you know, how do you deal with versioning? But everybody has their own mindset of how to deal with versioning. You can put it inside the JSON file, but then eventually it could get, not, you're talking megs, so it's not like, you know, we're worried about megabytes in the data that we all move, but it's the tracking of that. So then there's ideas of databases where you push it, it goes, oh, this has changed, automatically makes a new version in like a Maria database or whatever, and then pushes that down, and the plugins are both talking to it on both or every side. So as things get adjusted, there's a new version that goes up, email gets sent out, not to say, hey, you need to download this new thing. It's just like, hey, there's a new version, and the next time you launch Avid, we're going to jump to the latest version. So there's a lot of movement and ideas on how everybody kind of wants to handle that. So it gets a little tricky on the versioning side of things.
Yeah, but theoretically, once you guys are there, this format should be supported in almost everything that we're using on set and then in post. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the plan.
And then it's been checked out more in Nuke. It seems to work, but like I said, is that our first emphasis has been on Resolve, and for Nuke, the big interest there is that you send your stuff over for VFX, they can plug this in. And we've talked about a cut down version or a non-editable version of it, so where you want them just to see it one way so that there's parity. And so instead of sending a viewing LUT, you send this little tiny file, and it's much more accurate and fits into that environment. So.
And Rohan, I know you're sitting there quietly, but you texted me a question. What was your question, buddy?
Hey, you guys hear me?
Yep.
I was just wondering, you know, sometimes we may not have like the correct settings on the camera side, and we need to make like a raw adjustment setting. Is there any way that, say we do a raw adjustment in Resolve in the future, that can also get passed on in the CFE so that the post can kind of have it, and I don't have to tell them, hey, change the color temperature from 3200 to 5600 or something like that?
So like if you come in here and you adjust this inside Resolve, and I change this to that,
yeah.
The way it's written in the database, it's actually really tricky how they write their database. It's actually a lot of scrambled kind of ness to it that they understand. And so to do that is a little bit trickier than, unfortunately, a little bit trickier than just, you know, reaching out and grabbing it at this point.
But parametrically, if you did in the raw dbar, you did a color temperature change and you wanted to go back, the parametric, I mean, in other words, the processing is the same, and you could undo it and change it. It's just that knowing what they did. You just want to be able to. You may have to manually set it, but the parameters and the processing could reverse that out without any problem.
Yeah, and we know that the thumbnails are broken. Everybody, I know you guys are probably noticing, but it's that one's been a fun one for a while. But yeah, are there any other questions out there? How's everybody feeling? Anything?
Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
This is Rohan again. I just want to say thank you. I haven't personally thanked you, but this is a huge leap for, especially for my workflow, but it's made everything so much smoother. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, we're in the early days, and we'll keep moving on this. And then likewise with this forum, I'll let Brandon organize it, but we can certainly pick up again. And then also, if there's some burning questions, you can always reach out to me or save them for our next iteration on this, or the next time, and we can go into that. And in fact, make some suggestions if you want to spend more time on certain areas. We can set things up and prep for it or whatever. So.
Hey, Brandon, I got a question.
Yep.
The CFE engine, will it be able to run on like a box IO as it currently stands, or are we waiting for something new?
The issue with running on other things such as the box IO is the FPGA room. So the current living box IO that everybody has, I know it does not have the room on the FPGA to physically run much else. But there are open discussions amongst a lot of various people about running it, whether it be in a display or in software or whatever. Everybody's it's an open conversation. We're very open about it, and we don't like to limit what our users may need it to do. So it's available like as an SDK in Linux, Windows, and Mac. So it's kind of up to the manufacturers if they want to do something, or you guys all say, hey, X company, reach out, help figure this out. We want to see this tool set inside your software in some way. We are way more than open to the conversations for sure.
Second part to that, if the whole tool set that you just showed us in Resolve or EXD, or is there a stripped down version that could work on something like IS Mini, Box AO, etc.? But obviously, we don't need like the film grain and all that other stuff.
You mean, can we make it a LUT, or you mean?
No. Can you strip down the tool set to work on technology that we have right now, but that it still gets us more than we can do in CDL? You know what I mean? And then as new products come out that can support like the full CFE and what you guys can do, then obviously we get more features out of it.
Well, this is an engine, and it would have to be integrated into any of those products. And we're certainly open, as Brandon was saying, of talking with people. There are certain products out there that may not have the processing power to integrate it, and some that do. And we're in discussion with some of them to put it in. But if something comes to mind, let's discuss. And then also, if a particular vendor or one of those products hears it from the actual users, that may be a good use case. But like I said,
that's where most of the feedback has come from. Whether people were one of the very first things was like, oh, can I put this in my box IO? And of course, Bram reached out and was like, so. And we've had those good discussions with him about where things are and the limitations of current hardware. And most of the time that's what it just comes down to. It's just a straight limitation of room on an FPGA. Right. With also the side factor of like, I want it to be this big, but I also don't want it to get hot. And you're like, well, there's only so much give and take that you can do. Yeah, so actively looking.
Have you guys thought about that? Because like, it seems like, let's say CDL can do like 2 things out of 10 that we want to do, and this can do 10 out of 10. Like, what if there's a stripped down version that runs on Box AO that can do 5 out of 10? Like, we'll happily take that.
Now, the number of parameters don't really take any more resources. It's okay. Really just running the engine, and if there's enough room, and it's not a big, it's not a lot of room, but it's just a matter of the willingness of the manufacturer, they're looking at their business thing, and if they see value in this is all new. I mean, I think like I said, we're in discussions with a number of other people who are finally saying, oh, this is important, and people are wanting us to do it. So, you know, it's really a matter of that. And like I said, the number of features that are in it really doesn't, the engine's the engine, and it's just reducing the number of parameters you can adjust won't really make much difference in the resources required for it. And it is a pretty minimal footprint. I mean, some of the implementations, it's pretty minimal to get it into a box. It's just,
a lot of the things that comes up is the you know, the delay factor. Obviously you guys are making decisions at, you know, near real time, if not, you know, in real time. And as like you put more, it's not that like say a box IO couldn't handle it, but then there might be a delay in its processing, which would be unacceptable to what is normal now, right? So you can't go to like a 4-frame delay and everybody's like, cool, everything's out of sync and looks like, that's awesome, it looks great, but it sounds horrible because, you know, of how people are monitoring things. Is another factor. So it's not that the box IO couldn't physically handle it. It's just a matter of the power it would take to physically do it would cause other things down the line that would be, you know, kind of unacceptable for most productions.
Got it. I'm texting Brom right now, just saying.
I'm sure everybody is. One of the questions that came in real quick from Danny was, is there look protection within the CFE file? You want to?
Well, we talked about that. You mean as far as making it non-readable? I mean, that's something that could be extended. I mean, in other words, the engine that's implementing it, we could support encrypted files that would require a password to open them, and that hasn't been developed yet, but that's certainly not a.
And that's something we could do with the guys at LiveGrade too. Like there's a unencrypted and an encrypted version of the CFV file that they could export.
And we've had those discussions because you know, developing a look is, you know, that has value, and somebody's, you know, they want to protect that. And so that's been thought about, and certainly could be done where it's an encrypted file and you need a key to open it, or, you know, whatever means you're going to use to do that. So.
Are you
Chris,
saying
you
even the values
go
inside
ahead.
the file would be encrypted as well, or just the?
Oh yeah,
like
no, the file would just be the file would just be encrypted. You could, like right now, it's a JSON text file, so it's human readable and editable. It would just be a encrypted binary file, which would just be a bunch of ones and zeros that mean nothing unless you have the key to decrypt it. So.
All right, Chris, you had a question about cube terms.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, when you're talking about using ASIS, I mean, ASIS is sort of, if you will, a vector kind of calculation of color space versus an actual rasterized version of color space. When you're talking about hardware in a box in definition of a cube, how many points would you need to actually have a sufficient amount of points to actually represent an image properly for ASIS and HDR? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you're coming from. Certainly, you could come out of a camera in log C and have a cube take the log C and convert it through an ASIS pipeline into 709, say for example, and typically it gets down to, with that, a simple cube will work because you're basically going from a log image to a gamma encoded image, so that would work. And people have done that. You can get by with a 33 by, but it's gonna probably cause some aliasing. It depends on the interpolation, the kind of interpolation that the processing engine has in it. If it has, for example, tetrahedral interpolation, you can get by with smaller cubes, at least on the gray axes, without problems. A lot of people have, throughout the years, defaulted to a 65 by cube for implementing ASIS pipelines. And in fact, there are still some, I won't mention them, still some color corrector manufacturers that their ASIS implementation is based on just on a cube. And I know one of them uses, you know, they basically use 65 by cubes and seems to work okay. You know what I mean? And you can compare that to a default CTL reference implementation, rendering, and they're close. They'll be a little different across because of interpolation between the points, but perceptually probably works real well. So it depends what you're doing. I mean, certain functions in color management will work fine, and certain functions may not. It just depends. I mean, a cube can describe a lot of things, and of course, you can keep going larger and larger in the cube if you have more sharp bends and things needed to be done to have it, faithfully reproduce it. So
right. It just seems to be that in like an ASIS platform, for example, 33 cube still looks quite rough when comparing it to sort of a standard CDL workflow.
Oh yeah, well, if you're comparing it to a non-cube version of ASIS versus a cube version, it can. If you're comparing the ASIS to a non-ASIS workflow, just LUT-based, that's not an ASIS-based LUTs, there may be other things coming into that. I mean, ASIS has some known problems that are being solved that some LUT-based workflows don't have. I mean, there have been a lot of people who have done ASIS over the last several years and did not like the rendering, default rendering, say the 709, and what it broke in the image. And ARRI released a fixed cube LMT that basically made it look like the ARRI K1S1 lookup table, and a lot of people were using that just because it may not be the best looking. It was never intended to be the end all to be all, but it didn't break. So I mean, those are some things. And on that note, that's why we offer an LMT that basically recreates the full Colorfront engine within the ASIS pipeline, that where you can get something that you're customized and that you're going to be proud of. But yeah, and ASIS is going to continue to evolve. Some of the problems that are in the current ASIS pipeline are just that it supports a wide gamut. When some of those colors hit, they just get hard clipped, and that really breaks things, and you get a lot of artifacting and things, and all that's being looked at. I mean, at the current time, but where it is right now, that's what causes a lot of aggravation. And then just the default rendering, just without that happening, a lot of people, it's sort of spanning an old tradition of, well, let's try to mimic how film might behave, and or let's go to a more modern age, and it's sort of somewhere in between, and may not be the most pleasing thing. Our philosophy is that we need a library of looks, and then allow the user to, one size won't fit all. I mean, you need to customize it. Yeah. And also, we're pretty happy, and we're always looking for feedback, though, with our default pipeline, and we always default to our master look, and that should just plug in and make a really great looking image without any artifacts, and be a very pleasing image. And then, of course, you can iterate on top of that and change the look or do something more customized, but it should just wake up without doing any work. And no matter what the camera is and what the output device is, it should wake up and look good. And I think we've come pretty far with that. We're always looking for cases where if someone comes up with something that they say, oh, well, I'm not happy with this or that. We're always wanting to have that kind of feedback to continue to improve. So.
All right. Well, we're about 2.5 hours in. Or if there's any more pertinent questions, we can keep on going. Otherwise, we can end it up here, and then we can circle back maybe in a couple of weeks or whatever, and do another one of these once everybody has time to process the data and all the other classes. And don't want you guys to get burnt out with all these things going on currently. So yeah, I know Jamie had to leave. But I just want to thank everybody for joining. Hope everybody learned some stuff. Bill, as always, thank you. If you guys need to get a hold of us, our emails are pretty easy. It's Brandon, Bill at colorfront.com. So anything that pops up, or sample files or things you want to see specifically gone through, or edge cases, just reach out, and we'll help as much as we can. And that's it. So Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your night. And please stay safe.
Awesome.
Thank you all. This
Thank you,
was
Bill.
fun.
Thank you,
Thank
Brian.
you. Yeah. All right. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.